Okay, welcome everyone. This is the first in our weekly webinar series. We'll be doing these every Thursday from 12 till about 1. And the idea behind these weekly webinars is that we'll use it as a way of sharing some information, featuring college highlights, but also bringing in special guests to talk about specific areas of the project. And we'll also be using this as an opportunity to have colleges showcase their work to our larger community. As with all of our webinars, this will be recorded video and as a PDF and will be made available through our various channels. So if you miss the webinar, please be aware that you'll be able to watch it as a recording in the future. Okay, so I think pretty much all of you by this point know Salomon and me. So hi, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
We wanted to just give you an idea of what the format for these webinars will be. We'll take a couple of minutes at the beginning to do quick updates on items, sometimes operational, sometimes programmatic. We'd like to feature some college highlights for about 10 minutes or so. So we'll be talking with you more about that in a while. Each of we'll have a feature each week. It'll probably be about 20 minutes. And we want to make sure that there's plenty of time for discussion and questions. So there's about 20 minutes for that. And then we'll just wrap it up in a few minutes and then let you know what's coming the next week. So if you think of this as sort of a participatory almost like a regular show or a version of our update emails, then that's pretty close to where we are.
If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please put them in the chat. There's probably a chat function somewhere in your interface. Write it down, and during the discussion, we'll read them out and try to answer them for you during the session. And it'll be recorded so folks who see this after the recording can also hear and the chats as well.
In fact, you'll see in the chat bar already there should be a couple of links to some YouTube videos, so they'll feature again later in the webinar. Okay, so first up, our updates. First thing, you should have received an invitation by email to join our new workplace platform, and some of you have very kindly volunteered to be testers early on in this process. So we're now at the point where we're rolling it out to everyone. So if you did not receive an email invitation to Workplace, or if you're having trouble joining us on that, we'll be able to help you out with that. We have a couple of updates on the internships with the Foundation for California Community Colleges. Those contracts are just being finalized now. Salomon will have more information on that. And we're going to feature a little bit more, in addition to Workplace, we're going to feature a little bit more on preparing to develop your internship program. We'll be talking about that today. And then on an operational level, we want to talk a little bit about your fiscal processes to help you stay on track for spending and to make sure that you're going to be able to get your work, your fiscal work done in order to take advantage of your budget this year. A quick reminder that the narrative quarterly reports are due on October 31st, and I'm glad to see that several colleges have already submitted their reports. Thank you. And you will have received a notification of your budget approval, which will begin the process of releasing the 10% cash funding advance on the project. So all but just a couple of colleges are through that. So we're glad to say that everyone's on track with that process at this point. So this is how we'd like to organize the highlights so that we can feature 1 or 2 colleges each week is to think about what area within our 4 main outcomes you'd like to be presenting your work on. And the key to accessing or sharing this information so that we can highlight it during the webinars is to share it as a blog post on your website page at cccmaker.com, and also to will also share this information on the workplace account. So we've added a link in here for tips. This is from Karen Fraser-Middleton, our communications expert, to advising on how to develop and post your blog post so that we can then access it for the highlights. Also, Karen will be doing a webinar in the next few weeks on blog posts and how to write a successful blog post and some other communications information for the project overall. So the first thing, just wanted to talk a little bit about the workplace, and I've included the link up there, though you will have to be invited in order to join this workplace account. So the purpose of the workplace is really for our internal CCC Maker community. This platform will be limited just to people who are on our contact list within the CCC Maker colleges, as well as the TAP team and the Sierra College team as well. So the idea is that it's a safe place to share ideas and resources and challenges, and to share information in real time. Workplace has a lot of the same functions that you'll see on Facebook. You can post, you can chat, you can record, make video, or you can also use the phone conferencing and record as well. So there's a lot of flexibility with the platform. It's also a great place to upload links and even documents to as an ongoing real-time resource. You can tag people, and then topics are also searchable. So whenever you post something, make sure you, in the text of the post, put a searchable word so that can help people look for these topics later on. And then there's a mobile app for your phone as well, which is also very user-friendly. So you will have received an email invitation. If you do not receive an invitation, please let us know and we'll add you manually. You may receive an email that has multiple links in it, which is one for each group. Please make sure you click on each of those 5 links, because there's one also for the TAP. The reason that this is necessary is that many people already belong to a workplace company, as it's called, for their own school. And so in order to have people be able to belong to both, we need to set these up as multi-company groups. So that's a little level of complication that we've had to resolve. So if you are receiving multiple links, it's because your school already has a company account. Okay. And just to put this in the perspective of our other media, this workplace can also work well with social media, because you can, whatever you post in Twitter or on YouTube can also be linked in workplace. So it will create a way of both gathering all of those posts in one place, and it'll also help us archive. It's going to be fundamentally different from the CCC Maker website, which is really externally focused. So the work that goes on your college page in the CCC Maker website is going to be what we show to the public, or what we share in the larger community beyond our 24 colleges. So you might want to think about that as a distinction. We'll still be using email for official communications and notifications, so that will give us some redundancy. You're going to see items showing up on Workplace, and if it's something formal, contractual, something to do with the Chancellor's office, that sort of stuff, you'll also be receiving a formal email on that. Our goal, though, is that you're going to be using Workplace as the primary method of communication for day-to-day work. We'll be using the Smartsheet forms, such as the ones that you receive for the quarterly reports for narrative. We'll also continue using Smartsheet for the annual report, the template for which you'll be receiving fairly soon. And that will be used to help us gather data. We can use that to create dashboards and to use as a data management tool for the project. We'll also be using Smartsheet for various information forms, information gathering. So, for example, you're going to be receiving a link to a form in the next day or two, which will ask you to put in your academic calendar dates so that we know, because everyone's schedules are different, when your semesters begin and end, when your spring break is held, and when and if your winter and summer sessions are held. And that will really help us with our planning for events as we move forward. It's a task that would probably be really well assigned to a student worker or one of your student assistants in your lab. And finally, per Tony's requirements for fiscal reporting, we'll still be using Dropbox as the place where you will upload your fiscal reporting. Any comments on that, Salomon?
Oh, just that all of you that are listening and watching, there's some folks on the phone, just to make sure that you're comfortable with all the various platforms for the various communications that are required for this project. And as Deborah has laid out, there's several platforms that I think just takes a little bit of time to understand. So please let us know if there's any questions regarding any one of these. I think Workplace is going to be the method to the go-to platform to ask a lot of questions and get some help, and even for us to answer and broadcast in a video and maybe even images similar to Facebook, which I'm looking forward to, because emails sometimes get a little bit buried and you know, and only to one person. And this way it'll be just our community within that platform or Workplace. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone there.
That's great. And also, this doesn't preclude the use of some of the other platforms that have been used to date. So, for example, we know that at least one of the colleges, the students are really using Slack. So Slack becomes their sort of platform. The Workplace becomes the platform for our community of practice. And then the formal website becomes the larger one. So you can think about it in those terms as well. Okay, now over to Salomon, who's going to be discussing some ways to think about your fiscal planning as we move forward.
So in the slide that you should be seeing in front of you, and this is for a couple of folks that may not be looking at this on their screen, there's several words on the screen that are meant to represent a process. And the process that is being discussed is about your fiscal procedures in terms of procurement and purchasing of equipment. And for some of you who have begun the process of purchasing equipment, you may already be aware of some of these processes, but for some that have not yet undertaken the task of producing any equipment purchasing, you may want to just quickly book the next available meeting with a fiscal and business personnel so that you get to understand the processes of bids, possible quotes from vendors, and the amounts that are required for the various aspects of your threshold in your processes, whether some of them may need to be board reported, some of them need to be competitive, and how that transitions into a requisition, and how does the requisition get approved, converted to a purchase order, and then what happens when you receive the invoice, who receives it, what notifications are set out, and then lastly, payment processes, so that you're alerted that the payment has gone out to your vendor. And typically, you may want to help through many of these processes yourself and be aware of the workings of your fiscal and business personnel with the vendor, and help in that communication aspect of understanding where these processes are at. One important thing about all this, these take time. And so you want to know lengths of any one of these particular procedures, especially when you have to take into account the cutoff dates for purchasing, which typically may be in April or in May, depending on your institution, because around that time, they begin the process of actually closing down the budgets and actually producing a closing out of the fiscal year. And so they stop actual requisitions and purchase orders so that whatever's in the queue gets processed in a timely fashion by the end of July. So the cutoff date for you is typically much earlier. So you want to make certain that you pay attention to the cutoff dates of next fiscal year and backtrack from that date to the processes that I just finished describing that may take time, sometimes 60 days, sometimes 90 days. So you want to get that clarification up front. And you have to take note about this because there's only a limited 10% rollover to your next year 2 fiscal year. And so if there's anything that hasn't been spent in year 1 and it's more than 10%, you may actually be outside of the conditions of rolling your funds over to the next fiscal year. So you want to make certain that you have your spending planned out, your time frame planned out, so that you're not susceptible to this limitation of the rollover to year 2, which will happen pretty soon. So that's a little bit of why you need to be familiarized with this task. I invite you to, again, book a meeting with your fiscal and business people ASAP and get together and get all that planning in place so that you have the timelines, and get your vendors together so that you can start spending some of this funding that for equipment specifically that takes a little bit longer time than typical.
Mm. And the same sort of strategy has to apply to any contractual work that you're doing as well. So it's not just the equipment, it's any aspect of your spending that requires a multi-step process. So generally you would want to have all of your purchase requests, all of your all of this planning done within the next month or two. You really want to be putting in those requests before the end of this semester so that you have adequate time. There's also going to be, there will be some requirements that Tony will have for the end of year accounting, and I think some of you have already experienced through the seed grant funding closeout that there is some work involved in that. We're glad that the seed grant funding fiscal reporting has actually been concluded, I think with maybe just a couple of little outstanding things. So everyone in theory has been through this process at the reporting end in some form. Another thing to think about as part of the fiscal aspect is that the fiscal and the narrative reporting will reflect your priorities and the items on your work plan. So there is also an element to your fiscal reporting that will allow you to reflect on how your funds are being used and will help you to determine what the return on that fiscal investment is. So there's an element of analysis that comes out of this fiscal reporting that we'll be looking at more as we go along. But just to think about it, we need, you need to move quickly on this, but there's also this much larger context within which these orders and this process is taking place.
All right. So we received several questions from some of you regarding ongoing internships that you've initiated. Now, I want to make sure everyone understands that the contractual process with the foundation is going to go out relatively soon. All the negotiations and the framework to have Sierra College pay for your internships have finally been discussed and will be sent out momentarily. But in preparation for that, there's a lot of process questions for which we would like to address in these couple of slides so that everyone's in the same framework and operating within a structure of designing of your processes, which is important because that's, I think, partly what's missing for some of the questions that we're receiving is a process that needs to be developed and paid attention to, for which then nuances of particular internships that may or may not be qualified within the framework of the CCC Maker initiative could be determined with your processes. So here are a couple of prime questions that you should ask yourself as you develop your program. And one is, how is your college onboarding the students to the internship process? In other words, is there a formal process for which students understand that they're undertaking the steps to be prepared to inevitably be in an internship? And so that should be clearly outlined how students are onboarded, from the outreach aspects to it. How are you recruiting the students? Is there any meetings they need to show up? Is there any procedures in terms of signing them up? I'm sure there's forms that sometimes folks have to fill out to make sure that they make themselves aware. And also you want to look at whether you're recruiting from a variety of disciplines and demographics in your institution to have the equitable mix of your student population. So that's one question. The second question is, are you implementing soft skill training to increase the success of the internships for employer and student interaction? And this could be done with a formal embedded in the curriculum that you may have. Some of you have makerspace courses that you already are targeting or have developed, and so you may want to include it in there, or you may want to include it in workshops, such that students that sign up to your process are then prepared through some workshops, like the New World of Work, which can be done through curriculum or once again through workshops. So that's a very important point. How is soft skills being addressed within your internship program? The second thing, a third thing that you want to ask yourself is, are you developing a student preparedness, and how are you doing that? How are you communicating how prepared students are? Is it through badges? Is it through some interview process? The question about student preparedness comes into play specifically when you're going to put them in front of employers. And so you want to make certain that to maintain the relationship, a positive relationship with employers, that students understand that they need to be prepared to engage in a professional manner. So assessing student preparedness is a good way to make certain that your system and your process of onboarding, soft skill training with the technical training is hitting optimal performance for the students as they engage with employers. And so you want to make certain that you have a method to assess that. An exit interview of your internship program could be an easy way to assess that. And then lastly, how are you evaluating the career readiness and the makerspace effectiveness after the internship, such that the employers evaluate your processes that you've developed? You want that feedback loop back into your program. Are students who are signing up into your program, are they in the right disciplines? Or do they have the adequate soft skills? Are they actually prepared professionally to engage with the employer? And other aspects that you may want to consider, the outcomes of your program could also be evaluated. And this is the outcomes of a specific career technical education program could be evaluated as well within this evaluation process of the employer feedback into you and to the students. And that's important. So how are you collecting that evaluation process? How are you communicating that to employers? And how are you putting that back into your development process of the internship program? So these are questions that you should start asking yourselves as you start developing your program. And you do it in a group, do it with your advisory committee, do it with your faculty, and even have students chime in that have gone through your program itself. Those are good ways to get feedback from everyone to make certain that you develop the right program for everyone to be engaged.
Mm. Thanks, Salomon. And there is also, remember, the idea that the makerspace becomes integral to this process, in that the employers will be selecting students on the basis of a makerspace project and portfolio that the students have done. So really think about this as there's an entrepreneurial aspect to it, where the students have to think about how they're essentially competing for internships. How do you manage that process in terms of standardizing and fairness? And as Salomon pointed out, very specifically, how do you outreach to students who would not normally take advantage of an opportunity like this? So how do you move beyond the smaller group of students that you may be working with on a regular basis? And the reason for thinking this way is that we only have a couple of years to work on this project, and the legacy of this work will be the systems that you're setting up now. So if you set up a process that's working well, and if you refine it over the next couple of years, by the time the project is complete, you'll have a good working system that you can sustain and scale into the future.
All right, great. Well, internships can't happen without employers, and so you must have an employer engagement strategy to help your program. So you want to make certain that you have some sort of broad outreach with enough employers within your area, and that cover the gamut of work-based learning activities that you may want to engage them into. So we did a previous webinar a couple of months ago now, explaining a little bit about work-based learning. And so I'm not going to go into all the various activities that may be undertaken, but we can help later. But the idea is that employers should be given a portfolio of methods to engage with you. Some may just want to do a visit, and some may want to do the full-blown internship. But the idea is that have to understand that engaging employers, you must have a variety of ways, because it's a developmental process with them as you work together in your relationship to make sure what's comfortable for the employer to help you in terms of time and commitment, and as well as for yourself to plug them into the right planning and activity within your program. And so that's one method to be highly successful with engagement of employers, is to have this broad enough strategy. You need to collaborate with the employers when it comes to the requirements and skill sets and the internship outcomes, to make certain that both the employer receives the expected intern that is qualified, as well as for you to develop your program to prepare the students based on the requirements and the outcomes that are specified. So it's important that you sit down and clarify and collaborate with the employer to set the right expectations for the opportunity that that you're trying to fulfill with them, and explain to them that this is a learning opportunity for the students first and foremost, not necessarily free labor, and that that you welcome their contribution into the community that you're helping the student step into, and that this would be a benefit for their employees, excuse me, to help the local community for future workforce development, or even for offsetting some projects that maybe the company doesn't have dedicated staff or time. This is something that students can maybe work on and then bring forth as a presentation later on to the employers. There's a lot of win-wins that can be articulated, and I would be glad to talk to each and every one of you, specifically even visit with each one of you if there's any questions related to a win-win strategy for the return on investment for having employers dedicate some time to help you with your students. And then lastly, you want to make certain that the students are successful. So you want to make certain that you filter out students that may not fulfill the requirements of the internship. And so you want to plan a methodology for which those that may not fulfill the requirements of the internship, make sure that there's a plan for them to succeed in future round of internships. And as I alluded to earlier, the planning process of your internship program should include a scaffolded learning process for students and a methodology for tests for career readiness. And so you want to make certain that after, if you see students that may not qualify for an internship, don't necessarily put them in front of that if you feel they're not ready. Help them prepare through your program and have them reapply for the next one that comes about. So those are a couple of employer engagement tips that I recommend to make certain that the employers are successful and happy participants and collaborating with you, and that the students get the best opportunities that you want them to get, and for this fruitful relationship that you're trying to develop with your employers in your area.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Salomon. And one of the other things to remember with the employer engagement is that it is a continuous improvement model. So in terms of the students who may not be ready for an internship, the feedback or the information you get about why those students aren't ready can form really valuable information for creating a system whereby student prep is improved. So rather than thinking about the students who are not ready for an internship as being unsuccessful, really continue to look at this through our design thinking sort of approach, and identify, well, what are the issues there and how can we address that through the outreach and preparation process. So each step in this is a valuable opportunity to gain insight and once again to strengthen the process over the next couple of years.
All right, the next slide here is about success factors within your internship program. And so these are a couple of questions that you should ask yourself so that you're making certain that you're actually succeeding in developing the adequate program for your students. So the first and foremost is, how are students being supported for the fulfillment of the required hours or training or badges that you have before applying to an internship? In other words, that developmental process has to be not only planned and articulated, but how are students being supported? Are you using maybe older or maybe not necessarily older in age, but maybe more advanced students in your program to assist? Are you developing the new world of work throughout your faculty and producing those workshops and assisting through that? Are you providing work-based learning opportunities as they lead to the internship process? All of those require some support structure and some activities and budgets for which students need to make certain that the help is there and that you're supporting them throughout the process, versus just having them apply for an internship cold with no preparation. So that's one thing. The second thing is, are you partnering with a career center or a business intermediary, someone helping you prepare students to apply for that internship? You may not necessarily have the internal structures into your college to actually do this, and so you may have to contract with external personnel. Some of you have heard of Goodwill. Some of you are working with the workforce development boards. Some of you are working with other organizations that are a part of the industries that you're serving. There's personnel in there that can help you prepare students. Even just a simple face-to-face interview would prepare the students just simply for that application process. So partnering with folks to help you with this is an important part of succeeding in internships. Are you cultivating, the next thing is, are you cultivating the relationships with employers, especially making them aware of various work-based learning opportunities from exploration all the way to the internship? And so you want to make sure you visit employers and make the rounds, and take your cards with you and have some networking events at local industry economic development meetings and various aspects like that you have regionally, and cultivate those relationships so that you can at some point make that ask for assistance into your program. The fourth point that I have here is, how are the evaluations of the employers and students helping you improve your program? And as you constantly review this and refine this, as Deborah mentioned earlier, this is a quality improvement model for which the evaluation the employers provide of your students can and should inform the way that you prepare your students through the process, technically, professionally, and even just for the internship itself, for the application, maybe the portfolio that's being developed, or even the behavior of the students within the place of employment, can really give you good insights to understand how you can help students improve in a very experiential process that is not necessarily a given grade. It's really a method of feedback that is typically a bit sensitive in nature, but at the same time necessary for that students can improve and have that greater success and employability soon thereafter they finish at your great institutions. And these are a couple of notes that I put together for the internships that are forthcoming. There's going to be some YouTube links that I put not only on the chat function of this webinar, but also I included them in this particular slide. It explains a little bit about the Kolb's experiential learning cycle and how it is that we learn through experiences, which is what work-based learning is, what it's meant to do, and as well as the internships meant to help us with. So a little bit of background on that. A little bit of background on career readiness, and this is from the NACE folks that put together a very nice explanation of how we can assess 21st century skills that are necessary for today's jobs. So a couple of links there for you to watch. And I want to remind everyone that the internships must be aligned with one of the 3 CCC maker criteria. Now, there's a previous webinar that we did on the criteria itself, so you can look at that. But I also included the 3 descriptions later on in this presentation slide deck that you can look at the end of this PowerPoint. The contract from the foundation is almost going to be sent out. We're finalizing details, I believe, tomorrow, and you should see that pretty soon, if not next week. And that will allow you to basically use the funding that's apportioned to your college for the number of interns that would be fiscally, contractually extended to you. So more on that next week. And don't forget that those internships completed within the foundation's contract approval can be counted towards the CCC maker. So it's an accounting procedure that we are using here. So make certain that any internship that's paid by the foundation's contract are what you count for this particular initiative of CCC maker. So more on that next week. For which we'll have a webinar, and we'll have folks from the foundation explain to you a little bit about how the process of student onboarding and how you sign up will be also explained on next week's webinar. So join us then.
Right. So these are the 3 internship options, and you want to carefully review these because each one of them has a distinctly different flavor and criteria, but there are also a couple of overriding conditions that apply to all 3, and one, of course, is the idea of the student actually preparing through a makerspace project. So when you think about what this internship is, it's actually the culmination in a series of steps that has brought the student to this particular type of internship. These are designed to be fairly flexible. So there's the there's a traditional type of internship at the employer's site. The second option is where the students are actually working in the makerspace directly with a team that's part of an employer directed project. And then the third option is an entrepreneurship project where a student who has been through an entrepreneurial training program or has a specific business plan that's been developed through a specific formal program that can then be evaluated by a sponsor within that program, that student would then do that internship within the makerspace. So those 3 options are available. And we are glad to discuss how you're thinking about your internships and how they would fit within 1, 2, or 3 of these different options. We imagine that many colleges will be using at least 2 of these options, the employer on site or the traditional internship. So those are, you might want to refamiliarize yourself with that and think about how your own conditions will apply or will align with each of these options. So if you have, if you have questions, I'm sorry, if you have questions that you'd like, we have a few minutes now to discuss. And I see there's one question from Claudia. Is there a place where the internship options are listed for reference? Yes, well, we have them here. We're also, we'll be uploading that to the workplace internship group, and it's also documented on the CCC Maker website in the previous internship webinar. And we can also send out this the document defining the different types of internships through an update as well. Are there any other questions or comments?
And you can ask the questions, I think, through the chat function that's in your
Mm.
screen there. I think that's... And for those of you that are on the phone, that's a good question. I'm not certain how you can ask a question on the phone.
Mm.
But you can definitely reach out to, once we post this either on the, I know there's going to be a link on the workplace, so make sure you look for us there, and you can continue the conversation on workplace after this webinar finishes.
Okay. So the next session, which will be same time, same place, same Zoom link, etc., we're going to be looking in more detail at the internships as the contract becomes available and we start to move on that. And we'll also have our first featured college highlights. So look forward to that. In the meantime, just a reminder, the other big items out there at the moment are the narrative report, which is due on the 31st. And we're looking forward to reading those reports and seeing your first data drop. So that'll be fun. And we'll be happy to be looking for ideas from within your quarterly report for highlights, to use as highlights, and also for special topics for colleges to present in your own webinar segment within our weekly format. So, and here's just one last thing. If you have not signed up for a free Zoom account, please go ahead and do that as soon as possible. It's available for free to all community college employees. So check with your IT department if you have not yet set up a Zoom account. This will enable you to also to stay in touch with people through video conferencing and access some of the other features that are available. All right. Anything in conclusion, Salomon?
Just that I invite folks to jump onto Workplace as soon as possible. I think it would be great for everyone to continue with the questions and comments and any clarifications that you may have necessary for in the webinars or for anything, so that we crowdsource some of the answers. And this is a way that we all can help one another, and a quick way for us to respond in a informal fashion, especially as we help ourselves through this. So there's a couple of things. I know this was the beginning of these webinars, but hopefully as we get onto a routine, they'll be much more refined and directed with your input. So we'll definitely be looking at Workplace and collecting ideas and concerns, so that we make sure that we broadcast these out and do a little bit of legwork on your behalf to make sure that we prepare these webinars for your needs. So looking forward to it.
Thanks very much, everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. And yes, as Salomon said, we're always available offline as well if you want to drop us a line by email. Okay, thanks very much. Bye for now.
Goodbye.